Over the last couple of weeks, we've been sitting with James. This short, pithy, to-the-point epistle. And I have to say, I'm guessing it's not entirely been a sitting full of comfort. James is known as, we've said before, above all else, for being fairly blunt. And this is no exception. Of all of James's advice to the church, this is probably one of the most frequently heard, but also the hardest to know what to do with. And this is James 3, speaking to how we use our words. I'm using the message this morning because it captures some of that directness that gets lost in loftier translations. Don't be in any rush to become a teacher, my friends. Teaching is highly responsible work. Teachers are held to the strictest standards, and none of us is perfectly qualified. We get it wrong every time we open our mouths. If you could find someone whose speech is perfectly true, you'd have a perfect person in perfect control of life. A bit in the mouth of a horse controls the whole horse. A small rudder on a ship in the hands of a skilled captain sets the course in the face of the strongest winds. A word out of our mouth may seem of no account, but it can accomplish nearly anything or destroy it. It only takes a spark, remember, to set off a forest fire. A careless or wrongly placed word out of your mouth can do that. By our speech, we can ruin the world, turn harmony into chaos, throw mud on a reputation, and send the whole world up in smoke. And go up in smoke with it. Smoke right from the pit of hell. It's scary. You can tame a tiger, but you cannot tame a tongue. It's never been done. The tongue runs wild, a wanton killer. With our tongues we bless God our Father. At the same time we curse the very men and women God made in his image. Curses and blessings out of the same mouth. My friends, this can't go on. A spring does not gush fresh water one day and brackish the next, does it? Apple trees don't bear strawberries, do they? Raspberries don't bear apples, do they? You're not going to go for a dip in polluted mud hole and get a cup of clear, cold water, are you? Just one more note, if I may. I'm conscious of the time, so if you're following the manuscript, I'll depart from it even more than usual. So there you go. You can read that later. I somewhat enjoy my profession for a whole lot of reasons. But occasionally it gives me joy for different reasons, because it allows me to learn things about people I would not otherwise know. And one of the classic instances of that moment is when I interact in other circles. Like I hop on a call on other business, doing something different. And I'll be getting to know people, and they'll be getting to know me, and we'll be having a conversation. And then it'll come out of, well, what else do you do in life, Bryce? Well, I do have this thing that where I preach most Sundays, and you can visibly see people rewinding and recoiling in their head to make sure that they didn't slip up. Because, we have a preacher in the house. And in fact, every now and again, I'll have people come up and say, oh, sorry about the choppy language there. And that's how we generally think about language in the church. We know what not to say, and that list of 4-letter words that will get us in trouble if we say that. Even in the current vogue of shading our speech with interesting quantities of blue for the sake of shock and being radical or whatever reason, there's this stuff that we don't say. And rightly so. It's not a good place to start at any rate. As people who faithfully do well to speak in a way that doesn't scandalize or betray that which is not ours to have. Not necessarily to be an exemplar of Christian virtue by swearing with the swear words on diet, the sugar-free swear words, as it were, that we sometimes switch in there. But instead, simply to say, we value people well enough that we're willing to respect them and to speak respectfully at all times. Even sometimes when, you drop the wrench on your foot, and sometimes it comes out too. But most of the time, that's where we leave off. We train the tongue by simply saying, what do we not say? And what we don't do is the far harder work of what does it mean to use the tongue and to speak in a way that glorifies God and affirms all that God creates. And at this time, I'd even expand speak to not just what you get up and say with your mouth, but also what we say in other ways too. What we click like on or repost or share in social media. We are in a moment where our speech is both easier and far more amplified than ever before, but also is far more disconnected from consequence than ever before. We can send things out there thinking nothing of it, and it has consequence. We all have heard the studies. We all know the feeling. We're connected. But in connecting, we're also divided. The task of ruling the tongue that we're called to is one of calling us to account to a far bigger notion than just what we say or don't say, but rather how we act and are in the world. As is his way, James is quick to outline for his congregational readers the nature of the advice that he's giving. The audience that he is speaking to seems to be a body that is fond of the passion of the word, but with time that passion is taken into the difficult work of translating into from a spiritual passion to well, now what do we do and how do we live together, being human? And with that translation, that means that you have to talk about things like, we don't always say the right thing. We don't always do the right thing. And when that does happen, flames do start and fires spread and hurt results. We know this to be true. And to be clear, James is not telling us, well, simply shape up and conform with saying what you know to be right. No, instead he's saying, we all know that this is hard. We all know that we are susceptible to it, and we all know that it is hard to do. And I do note the irony when I say, yea, we are all teachers. And immediately follow it up with a text that says, be careful if you are a teacher. For I know that full well. Standing here doesn't give you license of getting everything right. And I know that sometimes what I say doesn't always come out as I might have intended. It happens. I remember one occasion a number of years ago where I gave a sermon where, I was being a little bit cheeky, as suggesting and going into question our propensity to look for a strong, muscular, military Christ that doesn't exist. But what somebody else heard was, we should look for a strong, muscular, militaristic Christ. And made that exist. And they rightly took exception to that. And I'm glad to say, after a few days, we were able to figure out where the miscommunication was and how it was there, and I was able to take responsibility for, that wasn't my best moment. Please, when this happens, and it will, I would much rather take responsibility for my mistake than to let it go unsaid. Because mistakes will happen. And I think that that's one way that we can do this and work at this. Like I say, we know that it is true that all of this is going to be hard and it's going to be weird. Every last one of us has our stories of woe about the words that we have heard and the words that we have spoken. And it's not always as sloppy or mean words necessarily. Sometimes it's precisely a phrased word spoken precisely at the wrong time that doesn't let them do the work they're there. Or worse still is the deafening silence that we sometimes receive in our most vulnerable moments. Those times where people don't know what to say, so we say nothing at all. And so the conclusion becomes, well, then nobody knows what to do and nobody really cares. Giving space for the imagination is often far worse than anything that could have perhaps been said. The list goes on, and we know it well because it's part of our humanity. And we know that fire, just to pick one metaphor that he uses here, fire has its place and its use and its utility. We live in a fire-oriented environment. But we also know that when fire gets going in the wrong way, in the wrong time, with the wrong winds, boy howdy, all bets are off. And sometimes the best that you can do is just get out of the way. The same applies to what we say and how we say it. So where do we go for good news within taming the tongue? Maybe the point here is that we need to find something here in our speech that points to something bigger than us. And James points to it too. The same mouths that pour forth praise can also pour forth poison. Perhaps the point here isn't absolutely the poison that our words contain, but rather just owning the power that language has. And as cautious and careful as we must be with our words, we also must speak with firm and solid conviction that when we do speak, the Spirit is also present. The Spirit works within our relationships, bridging gaps that sometimes we can barely know of. The solution to meanness in what we say and do is not particularly to say nothing at all, although it's a good start as we're taught as kids. If you don't have anything nice to say, but rather to say what we have to say with empathy that refuses to dehumanize anyone, even those with whom we vigorously disagree and distrust. Maybe taming the tongue is less about finding our ways to cheer for our team and our allegiance, whatever label we happen to prefer at a given moment, but to find ways of speaking to the ideas and notions that shape us and move us, and to say why more than because. Perhaps in it all, we need not despair for want of taming the tongue, but simply recognize what it is. It's something with great power and promise, where we have to have the humility and honesty to take responsibility for what we say, even when that becomes bruising to others and to ourselves. Because sometimes you also have to stop in front of the fire to get it to burn and bring it back under control. How we speak is not so much observing the list of thou shalt not read words, but we do well to consider the whole. And perhaps we do even better to add more four-letter words to our vocabulary. These are words that we avoid, not because we find them vulgar, but because we often find them hard. They're the hard, weird words of our lives. And they make for complicated work. But they are important words. I wonder what would happen if we thought about work less as obligation that has to be undertaken for the sake of pay or responsibility, but also as the opportunity to build and to be about the business of God in the world, each in our own way. I wonder what would happen if we spoke of duty more than just as an obligation that we owe to something or someone or some idea, but as a natural outgrowth of how and who we are. We do what we do because our allegiance is with God. Full stop. What if we spoke of love less as a state of one's heart and emotions around the individual, and more as our desire to emulate the one who first loved us, and to become who and what we are, because that's who we are created to be. The most important text in the Hebrew literature is the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one, the Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and your neighbor as yourself. It's the fundamental prayer of Judaism, and it's the fundamental prayer of Christianity. But the word here is not just hear, intellectually know, receive, but rather to say, hear, understand, get it inside here, and live it out. And going and doing likewise. That type of hearing is what changes and allows us to move our tongue and to move the rudder of the ship that we sail. We know that these things are important. If you don't move the rudder, you might hit the bridge. But we all have to hear. And in hearing, we all have to do one more four-letter word. We have to hope. Not as some sort of fanciful, in the by and by, everything will be just slow, you know it, yes sir, Bob. But rather to actively participate in what is coming now in the kingdom around us. Hope, work, love, duty. There's more four-letter words here. But I bet if we kept those lists as carefully as we do the others, in big and small ways, our tongue and our world would start to know the difference. May that be our challenge and our hope, now and always. Amen.